Welcome to a new episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library, recorded live in the recording studio at the library in beautiful Winter Park, Florida. In Books and Beyond, we have conversations with writers, musicians, artists, presenters, and other contributors. Most of our guests have appeared live at the Winter Park Library or will be presenting soon. We hope you'll subscribe to the Books and Beyond podcast and that you'll stay up to date with library goings-on at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. I'm Michael Werner, and I'll be your host for our interviews. Enjoy the show. Hello out there, library patrons, readers, and smart people everywhere. This is Michael Werner, the host of the Books and Beyond podcast, and we're here in the beautiful Winter Park Library. And today we're featuring a very special guest, Charles Steadham. And the reason Charles is with us today is because there's a special I guess a sort of a festival of sorts going on here at the library. Gamble Rogers, as we'll learn here in a minute, was born here in Winter Park. And for the last few years, they've had an event here at the library. So today, Saturday, there is a series, two films, two documentaries about Gamble. And then tomorrow, we have some special musicians coming in to play in memory of Gamble. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, I want to welcome Charles Steadham.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, glad to be here. Charles is the founding director of the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation, and had known Gamble for many years, and both as an agent, as a fan, as a friend. So it's really nice to have you here.
It's my pleasure, sir.
Yeah. Well, let's start this way. How did you get to know Gamble? How did that come about?
I was just starting. It was in my first year of opening Blade Agency as an entertainment agency in Gainesville, and by happenstance, my younger brother Steve was the club manager at the Rathskeller Coffee House on campus at the University of Florida. And Gamble was booked there on a multi-night engagement. And after my younger brother was a guitar player and a singer, and he was so impressed with Gamble the first night he saw him, he called me up and told me I needed to get out there and see this person named Gamble Rogers. So I went out the next night, and I was It just doesn't get any better than what
it just
what
blew
Gamble,
you away, huh? Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And spoke with Gamble after the show, and we began a series of conversations that evolved into us working together based on a simple handshake from 1975 until his untimely passing in 1991.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do you think made him special, Gamble Rogers? What do you think made him special, Charles?
I think his humanity. He was a gentle, kind, giving, very unselfish, true gentleman in every sense of the word, and a world-class
musician,
guitar picker.
Yeah.
Not a flat picker, finger picker, and philosophical humorist and raconteur at the same time in the tradition of a Will Rogers or a Mark Twain. Very unique combination of talents. He just had an uncanny ability to command the attention of his audiences and keep them thoroughly spellbound and entertained.
Had he learned to do that, or you think that was just something he just naturally came about with him?
Gamble was self-taught. He in his teenage years, he was diagnosed with severe rheumatoid arthritis in his spine. And his spine was in the process of actually fusing. And he'd always loved to hear his father play guitar. And he had his own guitar. His mother bought him when he was convalescing. He had to spend hours every day bedridden or flat on the floor under a heat lamp was the treatment that was prescribed at that time.
And he was a young kid then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his mother bought him a Merle Travis and a Chet Atkins album, and he taught himself to play guitar just listening to all the licks on the Merle Travis and Chet Atkins records. He never had a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Gamble loved good writing, loved words, and his mother gave him a dictionary along with the two albums.
Smart mama.
And he literally spent hours laying on the floor reading the dictionary. So he ended up with a world-class command of the King's English. He had a tremendous vocabulary, and he put that command of the language to good use in his stories and monologues. So instead of simply, he was a wonderful singer-songwriter, but you'll hear in the documentary film that'll be screened at the library here this afternoon, you'll hear Gamble talk about needing to find a way to command his audience, because Gamble's songs, sometimes the audience would be rowdy and they just talk through the music.
Mm-hmm.
But when Gamble launched into one of his philosophical, humorous monologues, everything in the club or the concert hall would focus. He would totally command everyone's attention. He was very animated on stage. And musical influences, I would say Merle Travis and Chet Atkins, certainly, but
right from the beginning.
But probably his influences as a showman, as a raconteur and storyteller on stage was probably Southern Baptist revivalist preachers.
Okay.
So he it was a very unique blend of skills and talent and artistry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where did his love of language come from, do you think? Was that from his mom, or just from his own reading? Or
I think just his upbringing with a wonderful family here in Winter Park.
Yeah.
And a good education at Winter Park High School. I believe I'm correct that he graduated in the class of 1955.
Go Wildcats.
There you go. Yeah. A lot of Gamble's stories they were all based on fact. They were all based on things that happened, observations that Gamble had made growing up and through his adult life. I mean, one of the stories that he tells is about the Great Maitland Turkey Farm Massacre of 1953, which took place at the turkey farm right across the road from Charlie's Bar and Package Store in Maitland, Florida. And he talks about his high school classmates, which he called the Maitland boys, and one of them that pulled up to the teeming turkey pens on the eve of Thanksgiving, and these are Gamble's words.
Yes.
Blew 3 authoritative toots on a tin-plated police whistle, which caused the somnolent and semi-comatose birds amassed there in holiday profusion to rouse their heads up periscope-wise to investigate the source of the disturbance, whereupon our ardent pilgrim leaned out the window of his rump-sprung Henry J. automobile and solemnly slew with his I'm not doing it justice.
Yeah, well,
but with his 10-gauge J.C. Higgins goose gun, and solemnly slew 497 birds, which thereafter was referred to by the chroniclers of our community destiny as the Great Maitland Turkey Farm Massacre of 1953. Well, the man that killed those turkeys has called me on the phone and spoken to me.
Is that right?
At the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation. So it's a real story. Gamble just embellished it with his command of the language, which I did no justice to. I apologize.
And that would have happened when he was in high school.
Oh, yeah.
That was when he was in high school.
He told the story decades later.
Yeah.
But he cataloged all of these life experiences, and he loved Faulkner.
Okay.
And as a writer, he was influenced by Faulkner.
Okay.
And Gamble's apocryphal place evolved into Ocklawaha County. There is no Ocklawaha County in Florida, but it sure sounds like there should be.
Right. And so he had a regular cast of characters, right? From what I
He
understand.
did indeed.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Now I know his father and maybe his grandfather too were architects. He never thought about renowned architects, and anybody that lives in Winter Park knows the Gamble Rogers, some of the buildings or the houses. Mm-hmm. He felt had no interest in going into architecture, or how did
he worked for the family firm for a while,
okay.
and was originally went to the University of Virginia to get a degree in architecture.
Okay.
But he kept turning back to the arts. He loved writing. He loved stories. He loved guitar playing, and all of that history is well documented in the films that will be screened here at the library. And I believe those films are available for that people could check them out and take them home, take the DVD disc home, and they're certainly available.
Yeah, I think they're here. I think they're here at the library.
Yeah.
The documentaries to do that. Excuse me. Let's talk about some of his influence on other people. We've talked about things that have influenced him, but I guess he had a pretty big influence on other musicians and other performers.
Really at all levels. Very, very notably at the national level, I would say Jimmy Buffett.
Okay.
Jimmy Buffett in the early days of his career, opened for Gamble for $50 a night.
Okay, wonderful.
At listening rooms from the Flick in Coconut Grove to the Trade Winds Tropical Saloon in St. Augustine to the Exit Inn in Nashville to the Earl of Old Town in Chicago to Ravens Gallery in Detroit and the Ark in Ann Arbor. Gamble actually, they traveled together for a year or two in Gamble's fastback Mustang up and down the highway. And Jimmy would open, and Gamble was the headliner. But Gamble introduced Jimmy to all those audiences in those wonderful concert listening rooms.
Well, let me ask you this, Charles. Did you see, in either in Jimmy Buffett or in other performers that were influenced by, did you see him in those performances? Did you see Gamble you saw Jimmy Buffett?
You see the influences.
Yeah.
You see Jimmy would acknowledge things that he learned from Gamble about how to manage an audience, how to work an audience, how to stay in control of an audience and not let the audience take control of you. And there were many others. Jim Stafford, who's from Winter Haven. Jim Stafford and Gamble became fast friends, and I think influenced each other. They're both great showmen. David Bromberg acknowledges Gamble's influence. And so many, regional and national artists. The two performers that'll be performing here tomorrow, Del Suggs and Sam Passetti, were certainly influenced by Gamble. The performers that have been here for this special tribute weekend for Gamble in the past, Bob Patterson, Charlie Simmons, and countless others. But let me give you a couple of
Please.
examples of how strong an influence Gamble could have on a member of his audience. I remember getting a phone call one day from a man out in Texas that said he just had to talk to somebody and tell them what a profound impact Gamble had on his life. And I asked him where he had met Gamble. He said, I never met him. He said, I saw him perform once. I was standing at the back of an audience of several thousand people at the Kerrville Folk Festival in Kerrville, Texas, and saw his performance. But his performance changed my life. He so moved me that it absolutely turned my life around, and I had to call and tell someone.
How does that make you feel when you hear somebody talk like that? I mean, just...
Well, then I got an email out of the blue one day from a gentleman in Taipei, Taiwan. His name was Vitas Raskavicius. And he wanted to know how he could order Gamble's CDs through the foundation if we would agree to ship them to Taiwan. And he wanted to buy all 6 of the CDs. I had to email him back, and I told him we'd find a way to put the right amount of postage on there and get it over to him, get it through customs.
Uh-huh.
But I said, I have to ask how you know of Gamble.
Right.
I never booked him in Taiwan. And he said that he had seen Gamble perform once when he was living in Toronto, Canada. Saw him at the Toronto Folk Festival. But he'd never forgotten the performance. He had subsequently immigrated to Europe. And then after that, moved again to Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had seen Gamble once in the late 70s, early 80s. He emailed me in 2003.
Wow.
He said he found himself thinking about Gamble one day and remembering that performance. He went online and discovered that Gamble had passed away in 1991 and reached out to me because he wanted to reacquaint himself with Gamble's material and relive that experience from decades earlier. So continents away and decades away, at the back of a festival audience outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
something communicated between Gamble and that man that made him think back to that performance that many years and miles later.
That's a powerful connection there.
That is, I don't. It speaks to the character of the man.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that, Charles, because I know his death kind of relates to that as well. Could you speak to that briefly and what how that came about and just sort of what it tells us about Gamble?
Well, Gamble was always ready to extend a helping hand. I don't know how many of your listeners have been road musicians, but anyone that has, I think, will assure you that life on the road can take a serious toll on you. It's very demanding, emotionally, physically and emotionally. And I would book series of dates on Gamble, where he's out on the road day after day after day doing one-nighters, jumping 300-400 miles between shows.
Mm-hmm.
And on one occasion, he had ended up a swing of dates down in Southwest Florida, Gulf Coast of Florida. But he felt like he was too tired to make it back to St. Augustine. He wanted desperately to get back to St. Augustine as soon as he could. He just hadn't been home in a while, and
Which is where he was living at the time.
He was past ready to be back in St. Augustine. But he overnighted at my house in Micanopy.
Mm-hmm. Right outside of Gainesville.
Right outside of Gainesville. And we were to have a business breakfast, just talk over some business briefly the next morning, and he was going to get on the road and go straight back home to his family. During the course of that breakfast, I happened to notice a man that was staring at us from across the room. And I didn't think that much of it. I just figured he had recognized Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
But when we got up to leave, and I went to pay the bill, Gamble walked out just ahead of me, and this man met him at the door. And they went over to the man's car and had a conversation that I couldn't hear. When I came out, Gamble waved at me and didn't say anything, but followed this man's car out of the parking lot. It all struck me as very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And it concerned me enough that a couple hours later I called his wife Nancy to see if Gamble had made it home. And Gamble wasn't there. I called an hour after that. Gamble still wasn't there. Finally, about 4.5, 5 hours later, I called and Gamble had arrived safely at home. I asked him what had happened.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The man's wife was on her deathbed at their home. She was a huge Gamble Rogers fan. He asked Gamble if he would come sit at her bedside and play a concert for his dying wife, which Gamble willingly did. As bad as he wanted to be home with his own family.
Sure. Wow.
And when I tried to tell Gamble how incredibly special I thought that was, he said, it really was very precious. That was his only comment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's the kind of man he was.
Wow. Yeah, and he actually died trying to help somebody, right?
He did. He went into 8 to 10 foot seas. A northeaster was blowing at Flagler Beach. He and Nancy were camping at what was then Flagler Beach State Recreation Area.
Mm-hmm.
That's been subsequently been renamed by the state of Florida to Gamble Rogers State Recreation Area. But a young girl came screaming up to their campsite that her father was drowning. Her father was a Canadian tourist that had ill-advisedly been surf fishing in the middle of a northeaster and gotten caught by a riptide and carried out. Gamble grabbed a air mattress from under his sleeping bag, but it wasn't an air mattress with handles on it for use in the surf. It was just, but Gamble knew he needed some kind of flotation because he couldn't turn his head to get a breath of, he couldn't swim like a normal person because of his arthritic spine.
Okay.
But he went in and did his best to save the life of that stranger, and tragically they both drowned.
Wow.
But that was actually the third time in Gamble's life that he had gone into water to save another life. It wasn't the first time. The first time he went into a raging river at flood stage to save the life of a horse that had gotten its reins caught in a snag and was drowning. And Gamble jumped off of his horse and went into the water and freed the drowning horse and got it out of the river. And then years later, at the Itchitucknee River Bridge, Gamble was in a canoe. I believe with his daughter Lynn, one of his children, Lynn. When a good old boy that had probably had too much to drink decided to dive into the river off the bridge, and he broke his neck, hit bottom and broke his neck. Gamble went into the water and pulled him out and saved that man's life.
Wow.
So
what a special person.
Amen.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let me try to end this a little bit on a lighter note, Charles. Tell me about some of your favorite music, favorite Gamble songs or records. Do you have a favorite?
Well, the foundation has been fortunate to release 6 CDs so far. I keep saying I'm going to try to get one more done before I cross the creek.
Okay.
But there's 6 so far, and I think my personal favorite is the 4th CD called Ocklawaha County Laissez-Faire. And I just enjoy that one because it was recorded live by an NPR affiliate up in South Carolina at a show that I booked up there, and they just recorded it top to bottom. It's not the whole show. Gamble's shows were 2 hours long, so it wouldn't fit on a CD.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some editing, but we edited it in such a way that it flows just very much like a live performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so that CD and a CD called The Warm Way Home, which was the second CD that we released, originally released on Mountain Railroad Records years ago. Those are 2 favorites.
Okay. And where do we get these, or where does any listener where can they buy the CDs?
Currently, they're only available by mail order.
Okay.
Through the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation.
Okay.
There's an order form on the website, gamblerogers.org or gamblerogers.com. And there's 6 CDs available and 3 DVDs, 2 of which are going to be screened this afternoon at the library here.
Okay.
And then there's one songbook called Songs and Stories, and a few other miscellaneous things that we've preserved of Gamble's life's work and are available by mail order through the foundation. We're pretty old-fashioned. You have to fill out the order form and send a check. We don't take credit cards. I'll tell you that the reason that we don't take credit cards is Gamble refused to carry a credit card.
Okay.
And I believe Gamble would roll over in his grave if he knew that I'd accepted credit cards on his memorial website. I couldn't bring myself to do that.
Uh-huh.
And you haven't lived until you've been an entertainment agent and my poor travel agent that routed Gamble all over North America, week after week, festival after festival, flying into airports and renting cars where the man that was renting the car refused to carry a credit card.
Mm-hmm.
That complicates travel.
It sure would. I can appreciate that.
But finally, in desperation, I convinced Gamble that he could make an exception. I would get a generic Hertz Blade Agency employee card with no name on it, just Blade Agency employee. And he agreed to carry that card. And the bill came to me, and once a month, Gamble and I would square up on his car rentals. But it made my life and my fateful travel agent's life a whole lot easier. So
I can imagine trying to do that hotels and without a credit card.
We did it for years.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
But,
wow, interesting. Well, Anything you want to add about Gamble here before we sign off? I want to remind everybody we're doing the documentaries today on Saturday, and tomorrow Sunday we have the musicians here.
Well, I just appreciate so much everything the library here is doing.
Wonderful library.
To incredible library. Would that every community had a library, anything like this library.
Since I've been doing this podcast, Charles, I call it the Winter Park University.
Oh, my goodness. Last year when I came down and saw this library for the first time, I said, boy, these folks are mighty fortunate here.
We are.
But I would urge everyone, if they could, to become familiar with some of Gamble's songs and stories, and just the type of person, the type of human being that he was really quite inspiring. He was the big brother I never had, and to this day, I try to make judgment call after judgment call, just asking myself, well, what would Gamble do?
What would Gamble do? Yeah.
And as long as you can look yourself in the mirror and truthfully answer that question, you're going to stay on the right track. He was quite honestly and sincerely, in every sense of the word, the finest man I've ever known.
Well, that certainly comes out in your stories and just talking about him. And Charles, really appreciate you being here today. I know you've got more things to do here with the weekend's activities, and with your work in the foundation. Wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you, sir, for all y'all are doing.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library. This podcast would not be possible without the generous help and support from the library staff, and especially from Jeremy Zorn. Jeremy's official title is Public Services Librarian, but he does many things here at the library, including producing this podcast. We can't do this without you, Jeremy. Our theme music is from the song Don't Go by Bovine Joe and the Buffalo Herd. That's Herd spelled H-E-A-R-D. We hope you'll let your friends and others know about this podcast, and that you'll come by the library for one of our offerings, which you can find at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. If you have questions or suggestions for the podcast, or just want to talk about Books and Beyond, please send an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. That's an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. Remember that the Winter Park Library promotes the free and open exchange of ideas and does not attempt to control or take responsibility for any opinions that may be expressed in this podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute or imply an endorsement or a reflection of the library's policies or beliefs. This is Michael Werner, wishing you well until our next episode of Books and Beyond.